conversation around those things and or around the special population, kind of what your definition is, kind of get on a good definition of what that could be. Identify one that either you work with now, you've worked with in the past, you may be a part of, whatever kind of special population y'all can agree on. Identify the strengths, and then the unique challenges. Any questions about that? All right, well then I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms. Hey, Patty. Was nobody in your room?
Hi, baby. You want to get down?
Hey, Stephanie, was nobody in your room either?
Hey, yeah, no, it was just me.
All right, I'm going to put you in with Patty.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
first, well, now I got to figure out how to do this. Okay, sign participants. I'm going to assign you to room 1 because I don't think anybody was in there with Patty. Oh, you got your kid. Say hello.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I'm no, and they eat in there.
All right. So, what did everybody come up with? What was their definitions?
We had CLDE students and kids on IEPs. We also talked about a very unique, we're calling it a special population of kids that just wander the halls all day and never go to class.
Oh man, I was guilty of that for sure. Okay, so CLDE and IEP kids, and then the kids who are just wanderers, right? The wanderlust through the hallways.
Yeah.
So what were their strengths?
Well, we mostly focused on the CLDE kids, and we decided that they seem to have a really strong community of other CLDE students in the school, and then also a strong community outside of the school.
Got it. So real strong
And then
community.
for the challenges, we find that if they're in a classroom where they're not really noticing anyone who's bilingual with them, that they kind of shut down a little bit and get a little bit more shy. They're not as open as when they have other students that they can speak their language with, um, be a little more open.
Right. So culture matters for them, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that's great. Okay, good. So has a strong community, but definitely culture matters. And if they're not with, maybe not necessarily directly with somebody from their own culture, but at least some pieces of their own culture, right? Something, whether it's language or some other things that might be able to make them feel a little bit more engaged.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Christina. What about Emily? Go ahead.
Which question am I answering?
All of them. So how did you really get, where'd y'all get to the definition, and then, what was the population you all talked about, and then strengths and challenges?
Okay. Um, Dawn and I kind of define special populations really broadly of it kind of defines anybody who isn't typical, anybody who doesn't follow that norm or has a identity that inherently comes with privilege, right? So talking about people who aren't the straight white Christian male, neurotypical people who might have limb differences, kind of just anything that's not typical. And then we kind of focused in on people who have experienced trauma. Those are also people who belong to a special population, and um, ideas of like the strengths of people who have experienced trauma, unfortunately, right? Um, it depends on their unique situation. Um, so it was kind of hard for us to kind of like pinpoint one strength like specifically. That also made it hard for us to pinpoint a unique challenge as well, but kind of it became like challenges for us and how we accommodate and welcome people of all walks of life and with all types of experiences into our own practice. And we talked about challenges of like, how do you invite people in while also providing structure? How do you allow for flexibility for them to show up in the practice the way that they feels the most comfortable and the most rewarding for them, but also have like norms and expectations, you know? So we kind of had more of like a thought conversation around the topic of being trauma informed in our practice.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it is so challenging to even identify a special population at times. To your point, right? Is you can almost identify anybody as a special population at the end of the day, right? And even if you go down the white Christian mindset, male white Christian person, in there, you could probably find different special populations with that group of people as well, right? Whether they were geriatric, whether they have diabetes, whether they, whatever it is, right? Every single time we get into a special population, there is a need to kind of remember of inclusivity. Like, how do we include everybody into this? How do we make them feel special without re-traumatizing them, or any of those types of things, right? We want to make sure it's safe, and welcoming. I think that was definitely what I heard from you as well. Let's see. So thanks for sharing. Let's see. Anybody else? Too easy. So let's go ahead and look. So whenever we talk about special populations, Yoga Alliance has a definition for special populations. And their definition is this. I'll go ahead and read it. Special populations relates to research evidence on healthy individuals in special work, health, or life situations. The research is obtained from real-world environments as well as information derived from specific, select, and controlled laboratory or other conditions. So this didn't even really define it, but kind of talked about the different areas that it might be in, right? And the link that is down here at the bottom, you can go to that link and they have all the research for different populations inside of Yoga Alliance. And I say all the populations, like I mentioned earlier, we could probably really get down to special populations, and almost everybody in the world would fall into some type of category of a special population. And it's important for us to kind of be there and be able to create that space around all that, right? And some of the special populations that they kind of have inside of there and that they talk about is cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, metabolic disorders, immunology disorders, musculoskeletal, neuromuscular, right, psychological and behavioral, cancerous diseases. If you ever run a group and there's people with cancer inside of those groups for yoga, it's very important to kind of know if somebody has cancer there as well, because their bone density and other things can be really bad. Also, whenever I say bad, it'll be very low and there's a high potential for breaking bones. So whenever you're working with people with cancer, you wouldn't want to do any arm balancing type of things, right? You wouldn't want them to feel off balanced. So more than likely, you'd probably even bring in a chair, right? So kind of knowing some of those different pieces. Also whenever you're working with pregnant women, right? Postpartum, right? Or menopausal women, right? All of those come into play whenever we are teaching yoga. The way that you would approach a pregnant woman is different than a menopausal woman, right? Both may have some hot flashes and different things like that, but still may generally approach them in different ways. But I'll also say, if you are working with some of these populations, it might even be important for you to get them to have approval from physicians and healthcare professionals before they come into your class. So that way, you're kind of cutting out some of that liability. And while this kind of helps us understand special populations from a health perspective, it does not encompass everyone. And it kind of goes back to that mindset that almost everybody could fall into a special population, right? At the end of the day, we might have certain characteristics and traits that may help us have some privilege behind that, but we still may also have things that may hinder us, that may sound bad, but that may put us more into the realm of a special population that we may need to not worry about, but we may need to plan for in our sequences. Let's see, does anybody have any questions about Yoga Alliance and anything? Again, if you go to that website, they'll list all kinds of research around special populations and different things like that. And if for some reason it's behind a firewall or in their portal, once all of you graduate, you'll have access to that as well. But any questions? Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the social determinants of health. How many people here have worked with the social determinants of health or learned about the social determinants of health and how they impact health quality? All right. New to me. Okay. I have. So kind of at least a mix right now. So the social determinants of health. So what they really are is, according to the World Health Organization and Healthy People campaign, the social determinants of health are defined by conditions in the environment in which people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health functioning and quality of health outcomes and risk. Right? Whenever we think about the social determinants of health, I think the biggest thing to kind of take away from the social determinants of health is that according to the social determinants of health and the research behind it, only 10% of your health outcomes is dependent upon medical appointments, right? So what that really means is your lived environment is more important than the medical appointments you go to, but our emphasis is always on the medical appointment and not necessarily our lived environments. So whenever we think about the social determinants of health and how we can bring yoga to that, is really we are trying to create something that is in their lived community and not necessarily something that is in a healthcare mindset, because at the end of the day, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is healthcare is drastically declining. It's failing miserably, and it can't keep up. And if you look at all the statistics, I may have mentioned this before, but I think it's by 2035 there will not be enough pulmonologists to train the next generation of pulmonologists. That is a dying field and is a very important field. But once COVID hit, pulmonologists got out at rampant rates, and then there was nobody going into the field. So literally, there could be no pulmonologist by 2035, or no new pulmonologists, I should say. And then there's other healthcare fields like that. And then I want to say by 2045, the physician population is drastically going to be almost annihilated, right? Which is important for us to keep in mind, but also not to be afraid, because only 10% of our health outcomes is dependent on those particular people. So it's very important for us to kind of think about that and think about it in a global context of, why is it always that we're looking to something else instead of our own lived environment. All right. So let me see if I can play this video. It's not playing. It's no big deal. Okay. So the video, what this video really shows, and the people who were in the coaching course probably got to see this one, but this video shows people in a hospital, and it kind of walks around and it shows like the janitor who'd never been on vacation for like 5 years. It shows people who have cancer, people who didn't have cancer, people who's going through divorce, people who just got married. And it didn't matter whether they were a patient or a staff member at the hospital. And what it really shows is that we don't really know anybody's story, right? We don't know what they're going through. We have no idea what is going on in their lives. We don't know why they're being short with us. If we go to check into an appointment, we don't know why a provider might or might not want to talk to us. So many different variables going on. And then on top of that, add a layer of, systematic racism and things like that on top of it. And then you have the differences between health outcomes between, groups of people, which is one thing that we're trying to fight. But whenever we look at this and we really talk about healthcare, whenever we look at this piece right here, this is how much money we spend this is the life expectancy on this side, right? So the average life expectancy, this is the average cost per capita that they spend on healthcare. And, these are the dollars, and these are the countries that are really the more developed countries in the world. So whenever we compare to these different countries and we start to think about it, we see that the United States life expectancy is roughly around 77 years. But whenever we look at how much we spend in healthcare, right, it's all the way up here to where it is the most out of any developed country. We spend astronomically more than anybody else. But then whenever we look at where we are in comparison, and we look at our life expectancy, our return on investment for what we spend in healthcare and what we receive is drastically different, right? So another place to think about is Cuba has the same, a little bit less, but the same life expectancy as the United States. And out of all developed countries, they spend less than anywhere else. So really, whenever we think about this, right, we have a poor return on investment, right, for whatever reasons, probably multiple different reasons out there. But we are trying, what's a good way to say this? We tend to say that the medical system is broken and that we spend too much money on it, but at the same time, they only account for 10% of our health outcomes. So anyway, how does everybody feel about this right here? Does anybody have any thoughts on how much money we spend per capita in the United States on healthcare, and yet our life expectancy is one of the worst.
I find it when I first started doing therapy that, well, actually my master's program, my professor was like, you know, there are going to be some people who get better just because they walk into your door. It doesn't matter what you do. It's just the psychosomatic part of they are walking in and they are getting help. And then there are going to be some who, no matter what you do, will decline. And then you, again, she said it was like the thirds. And then you got one that's not going to change. They'll just be kind of status. And looking at this, it kind of makes a little more sense now that I really do see those thirds. And when you say that we just get that 10%, it's kind of shocking, and it makes me feel like I'm a shitty therapist at times.
Yeah, I will say I wouldn't say a shitty therapist, right? Is is that we again focus on all the wrong things. For somebody to come to you for therapy, you have to give them a diagnosis, right? And then on that diagnosis, you label them, and then on that you bill based on the pretenses of what that diagnosis is. And then if that diagnosis goes away, then technically you're not allowed to bill anymore. So we continue to give them that diagnosis, even if the diagnosis is less, right? So there's like so many systematic issues with just the system behind therapy that, that it just causes more issues than good, right? And I'm not saying anything about you, Karen, so hopefully that's not coming off negative towards you, but it really is that the healthcare system sets us up for failure whenever we get into these positions, right? And it just hurts. So
No, you're good. I don't take any of this personally. Plus, I mean, you've already heard what I say, and last time it was, you know, all fun and games.
that's
But
right.
saying that I meet somebody and I have 53 minutes to diagnose them
That's right.
before, like, I can't continue to move on. And I've always been I'm going to let you know this, and I'm going to give a preliminary, and we're going to talk about it. So I wish more people would kind of do that. And I think that 10% might change a little bit if it was more of an open dialogue rather than, oh, I am depressed, rather than I have depression or I struggle with
That's right.
this. I think if we stop labeling ourselves with it and just understanding that it's something that we deal with or struggle with, I think the mindset might change a little. That's my 2 cents.
I think you're right. And, I think, you bring up, great points. And at the end of the day, healthcare, healthcare is built to save the institution and the clinicians and not the clients. So what I mean by that is, like, if you really think about individualized patient-centered care, that means that each individual person would not fit into an algorithm. But yet we always, as Western medicine, try to put people into these, what do you want to call it, linear paths, right? Like if you have X, then it has to be Y as the next treatment. And if Y doesn't work, then it has to be Z. And if Z doesn't work, then you're just pathological and there's nothing that's ever going to help you. And you're going to bounce from doctor to doctor to doctor until they prove that you're crazy, right? Or whatever it is, right? And I think that some of the things that I think about whenever we think about this is I got a buddy who has Lyme's disease, and building up to get his diagnosis for Lyme's disease, he had to bounce from provider to provider to provider. All along the way, people saying, "Oh, this is just this is psychosomatic," or this is all in your head, and basically being gaslighted about his pain and all these other things during the entire time. Finally finds a doctor after 7, 8 years, and then by that time his stress levels and all these other things, his life is kind of falling apart, so his health outcomes have drastically declined by the time he actually starts the treatment that he needs 7 to 8 years later. Right? And then now he's got all these other social determinants of health that are impacting his health, and there's not much we can do about it. I just find it very sad. And Emily says she wants to move to Switzerland. Absolutely. Whenever I look at this, I always think Japan, right? Because right here, you can say they live up to be on average over 80 and roughly spend, I'd say average compared to everybody, right? So they're kind of average. But also if you go to Japan and you drive around, you can find people doing Tai Chi in the parks. You see a little bit more active and mobility things kind of happening. I'll say here in Colorado, we're probably better than most states in the United States. But that's really the difference that I see is Japan takes a community style model, Switzerland as well. A lot of these places, they put the ownership not on healthcare, right? They put the ownership on the communities, and then they put more money into the communities to build these types of places that people can really thrive in. And I think that is truly the difference between the United States healthcare, right? Is they view it as this siloed system that is off over here that will only be 10% of your health outcomes, while everybody else is really looking at that like that's only 10%. So we need to invest not in the 10%, we need to invest where you spend most of your time, which is in your lived environment. So why is it changing? We suck as a country in addressing upstream mindsets. I will say I've done some consulting work on for Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA on developing value-based care models and alternative payment methods. Whenever you really get into that, a lot of times healthcare officials and this kind of goes into Christina's comment down here is that our money goes into healthcare executives and all these other places besides actual healthcare. But whenever we actually talk to healthcare and we talk to like emergency room physicians and primary care physicians and all those other things, is they tend to say, well, if you're already meeting me here and you have this chronic disease, it's way too late, right? So if you waited until you had a symptom, it's way too late. And they will push back and say this has more to do with your behavioral change and the things that you do than it is so much whenever you go to healthcare and seek healthcare. I don't agree with that, but that is the mindset that the healthcare facilities have, is that they are only here to cover portions of your healthcare, and it is more reactionary than it is preventative, right? That they are here. Insurance isn't necessarily something that you use ahead of time, right? Insurance is something that you use after the fact. So their arguments are always that your health choices is what led you to where you are now, so why should we have to pay extra because you chose blah 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 blah, right? So again, I'm not saying I agree with that mindset. I'm very much on the opposite end of that spectrum for sure. But I do think the problem is we also don't know how to implement a new type of system. I may have said this before, especially in the coaching course, but we have an opportunity. So the VA, for instance, is the largest single payer system in the world, right? Not in the United States, but in the world. They are the second largest vendor in the world. They are the what was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, they are the largest employer in the United States. Maybe not now, given all the cuts, but they are huge, right? So we have this very large system that is a single payer system, but yet we don't know how to make it a single payer system. The VA, all the physicians are still graded off of RVUs, which is exactly what they're graded off of in the private sector. Whenever we compare VA physicians, we're comparing them to the private sector and what people are doing. We're not even trying to build a model that could really meet the needs of individual people in a melting pot environment like veterans are, right? So anyway, I find it challenging that we are changing because we suck at providing health care and doing these types of things, but also I don't think we know how to change it, right? I think that is the major piece, is we don't know what to do with all of this, right? And at the end of the day, how are we going to change it? In my opinion, is implementing a whole health system. And a whole health approach adds that order and structure, but also allows you to take the priorities of the individual that is in front of you, that is also in the community that they live in, right? And I think that's ultimately the very fundamental piece that we have to change. And then we have to change how the payment system works at the end of the day. Right now, it's you have insurance and you go to a provider, you may have a copay, you may not, but at the end of the day, you go to somebody to pay for services to provide you with health care that is not preventative. It does not look upstream. It's not looking at root causes. It's looking at symptomology and how to decrease symptomology through an algorithmic way of providing medicine. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on why it's changing. But whenever we do think about that, I think we've already kind of said this one, are defined as conditions and environment. Yeah, we've defined that already. So really, whenever you look at the social determinants of health, they kind of fall into these different categories here. Let me get my laser pointer. So whenever you look at, like here, economic stability, right? Employment, is there enough employment? Do we have enough food, or is there food insecurity? Is there housing instability, poverty, education, all kinds of things, different areas around here. And this is more about poverty education. So neighborhood and built environment, right? Can you walk in your neighborhood? Can you do these types of things? If not, what does that really mean, right? And if you can't have a good built environment, or if there is a chemical plant in your neighborhood, right, that smells all the time, and all these other things that can happen in your lived and built environment. Healthcare, do you have health and health care? Because those tend to be defined almost as two different things within our systems. Health is something that you own. Health care is something that you go to a facility to receive. And do you have that balance inside of your community and lived environment? Social and community context, right? We know that we are social beings, and if we don't have this social context, we tend to die younger. It's a normal thing that happens. And then, of course, education. This is where you all fall, right? And as you can tell, the differences in education, actually, I shouldn't say the differences in education. The differences in you being able to receive the funding you need in your school is dependent upon the lived environment that you live in, right? And I don't think it should be that way, but that's kind of how it is. Maybe not in all of the United States, but at least in Colorado Springs, that definitely seems how it is right now. So it always makes me think of how, when I was a kid, my mom would send us outside and we would play outside all day. But many of the kids I teach can't go outside to play. The area isn't safe. There isn't a place for them to play. And Emily, I'll add one more thing to that, is the current political climate sometimes might not let our kids go outside and play because those parents are worried that their kids are going to get scooped up by ICE and all the, the polarization that we hear inside of our media. I shouldn't say polarization. We see it in Colorado of people getting yoked up right now, and different things like that. So definitely extremely challenging, and hurtful. Or they don't want to go outside because of technology. I think that's another big one, is technology has taken place of that. But I'll also add, I didn't play many video games. I did play some whenever I was a kid. We still had a healthy balance, I feel like. I feel like now technology, Patty, to your point, is now, whenever I was a kid, we had to go to somebody's house, sit down, right, get their parents' permission, go into their house and play video games. And then once we got too loud, we got kicked out. Now, whenever kids even get kicked out of the house, they're sitting there at the park on their phones or their iPads or, whatever technology device that they can take with them. And I think that's another major barrier, is now technology is so readily available. It doesn't matter where you are. You can almost have some form of technology either on you or be able to go pick it up real fast. So here, this is just a different way of looking at the social determinants of health. But I always ask this question here, is we know for a fact that individuals spend 90% of their lives within 5 to 20 miles of their home. And we know that social and community comfort, right? Blue zones. I think we've talked about that in here before in the Netflix show that really dives into the research and kind of building blue zones. And for those who don't know, I guess maybe I should bring that up just in case people don't know, but blue zones are a place where people live to be 100 on average, more than other places in the world. I forget how many there are, and there's some that are bigger than others. And the Netflix show really kind of walks you through that. So we know that social and community comfort plays a major role inside of our health outcomes, right? Because all of this equals how our health outcomes are. So whenever we look at that and we know that we spend this much time inside of our built environment, we know that we need a social and community comfort, right? We need to be able to engage and do those things. Then why do we focus all of our attention on healthcare and the things that healthcare are not doing and all those different things? Why do we think as a society that if we know and research tells us that we can do these things, then why is all of our attention spent here?
We don't like to be uncomfortable.
That's absolutely right. You don't like to be uncomfortable. That's right. We don't like to be uncomfortable. So, I will say this to me speaks to, we also tend to look to somebody else to come up with the answers for our own health and our own happiness, right? And I feel like society has taught us that. And I think healthcare is one way that they taught us that. If you're sick, you got to go somewhere. If you show up to healthcare and they don't treat you right, then healthcare is the problem. It wasn't the fact that maybe some of the decisions that you made in these places led you to the healthcare appointment that was bad. So I think there's so many different ways to look at this. I just find that, right now, I have spent a portion of my life trying to focus on transforming many different systems, healthcare being one of them. And whenever I look at transforming healthcare, like I said before, healthcare is a dying field. They can't keep up. The payment system isn't there. Most hospitals around the nation are losing money left and right. They're going to have a bailout soon, in my opinion, for healthcare again, because literally nobody can keep up with the demand of healthcare. And we're spending millions to try to transform healthcare to a new whole health type model or something along those lines, a patient-centered model, whatever you want to call it. We're trying to transform healthcare and spend billions, if not trillions of dollars to do that nationwide. Because if you think about what it would take to transform healthcare, we have to transform the way that we teach education. We have to change the way that we bill. We have to change the way that we currently pay for that system. We have to change so many different things to then include that we have to change somebody's behavior at a very fundamental level, which is the provider providing care to you, right? So all of that, we would spend millions and millions of dollars for only 10% of your health outcomes. When in reality, we could dump those millions and millions of dollars into places where you spend 90% of your time, or we could build up places for social and community comfort, or we can increase health or education access, right? Because we know that is a major problem, right? If you don't graduate or you don't have literacy, right, those health outcomes definitely track, right? People who have just a high school diploma versus a bachelor's degree, those health outcomes are drastically different. So why, again, why are we spending billions of dollars on healthcare to transform and reform healthcare when in reality, it will only be 10% of our health outcomes? So the climate of the U.S. healthcare, right, is health behaviors underlie 80% of all chronic diseases. And, level 1 CPT codes, which is really those types of approved for preventative counseling on health behavior since 1990, but they're hardly ever used. So whenever they're not ever used, then what's the point in even having them, right? Especially whenever we look at it and they're not even providing it, or if they are billing it, then the obesity rates are still as high as they are, chronic conditions are as high as they are, and we're still not meeting the demand of what is going on with our patients. And 17.8%, this still really just talks about how much we spend on healthcare. And in reality, most of the people who are dying, and the reason why it is avoidable deaths at the end of the day. The mortality rate is not driven by the healthcare appointments, CPT codes, or anything like that. The ultimate mortality rates is driven more by avoidable deaths, right? Which is really more geared towards health behaviors than it is the health outcomes that you have at your healthcare appointment. I had this slide in here all the time too, because I think it's important for us to see this, right? Because we do not do anything good at all in healthcare. Because whenever we look at this, right, health statuses, life expectancy at birth, we are pretty low on that totem pole as well. Infant mortality, like this drives me crazy. Why in the world do we spend this much on healthcare in our healthcare facilities and we can't even keep our babies alive, right? But then we come down here and then unmanaged asthma, right? We're about middle of the track, right? So maybe we're doing good in treating that asthma, but unmanaged diabetes, right? We're so low on this as well that it's like, man, how much are we spending on healthcare and we can't even get diabetes right? We can't even get their labs in to make sure that they have the appropriate medication that they need to manage their diabetes, and are the nutritional advice and those types of things for their lived environment to be able to do that. And then, of course, safety during childbirth, we suck at that as well. But man, heart attack mortality. I don't know if you all know this, but other people tend to come to the United States for healthcare only for our heart approach, I guess you can say, whatever you want to call it. But our ability to do stents, our ability to take care of arrhythmias, our ability to manage heart disease overall, we do very good, but everything else we suck at. So, whenever we look at this, we have to kind of remember that, if somebody talks about a bad experience in healthcare, that is a lived experience, but it is not a unique experience at the end of the day. And the bad thing is we focus and we ruminate more on the poor health care experience than we do think about changing our own behavior, right? So again, it's more of that outside look than it is on the inside. This is what we need to do. Social factors that really affect health outcomes, right, is low education. I think I mentioned that earlier, right? We know there is a direct correlation to shorter longevity for people who are not as well educated. Area level poverty, right? If you live in a poorer area, I guess you can say, then you are not going to have, or you have less likely to have good health outcomes. Income inequality, right? We see this all the time, especially with very wealthy people. Why do wealthy people get to live longer than people who are not wealthy? And one thing that I'll say is the reason why they do is because they do things like whenever you see people with a running glucose monitor that's not diabetic, right, is because they're looking at their behaviors of what they're eating to change what they're eating to manage their glucose in their body before they even have diabetes. They go and they get full body MRIs that cost thousands of dollars, and then they can head off anything that they see in their bodies, right? So the health inequality is most certainly a factor, but I would say is probably more of a factor of not having access to all of those different things that we're talking about that impact it. So not necessarily the money, because I would argue that your perspective of how you're living your life is more important than the money and the inequality of income. Because usually whenever you have low income, then you tend to have depression and other types of things like that. Individual level poverty, right? If you are poor, but you live in wealthy environments, there's a friend of mine, I say he's a friend, he actually won 2 Super Bowls, and me and him was working security after I got out of the Marine Corps. And I gave him a ride, what I thought was going to be a ride home, but I ended up giving him a ride to the homeless shelter. So a man who won 2 Super Bowls as a defensive tackle, and now is getting a ride home from, I was probably 23, 24 years old, if that, and I was giving him a ride home, and I asked him, I said, you know, I didn't ask him like this, but I basically said, how did you end up here? Right? Like I don't want to be there. Right? I didn't say that part, but I was kind of like, like, man, you've accomplished all these things. You got to meet all these great athletes. You got to be a part of all of these different things. And he said that was the problem. Is he said I had to keep up with everybody else that I was going to. I had to keep up with the parties. I had to keep up with that. And he was an African American man and playing football in the late 80s. So he got no money, but he was trying to keep up with everybody else. So even people who live in those types of environments can most certainly experience those types of poverty issues, racism, and other things that keep us down as well. Low social support. I think that kind of goes back to just those social, those social pieces that we need. We need to have a community. We need to be able to laugh. We need to be able to cry, and we need to be able to do that with each other. Racial segregation. I think this one speaks for itself, but we know for a fact that racial segregation, not only does it impact health outcomes today, but we also know in research that racial segregation can create generational health gaps as well. So, and a good example of this would be the COVID-19, I almost said the vaccine, but the COVID-19 virus killed more African American men, I think it was, not women, it was more on the men's side, than it did, their counterparts on any other race. So just in my opinion, that was for the years of racism and the generational things. And we see that in other areas like diabetes, because we kept so much food away from African Americans that then they ended up eating all the scraps and other things that was high in cholesterol and all these other things. And then now they have, generational heart problems. They have, diabetes, which I think is the big one in the African American, especially male community. So absolutely, I think this is. But what else kind of stands out to you all that are kind of social factors that would impact your health outcomes?
I think it can really be poor modeling by adults from generational modeling, honestly.
That's absolutely right. So anytime I mention any of these things, I will say I don't believe that there's just one factor that would impact somebody. I fully believe that there is a biopsychosocial spiritual model that impacts people, right? That you may have a predisposition of diabetes, right? And I think this could be a good example here of diabetes. So you're African American, you're born into the African American community, and now you have this biological factor that may impact your life. But then if you live in an environment that teaches you to eat healthy and those types of things, maybe that biological factor never sparks, right? But then let's say you live in an environment to where, I'll use African Americans again, that now, we're talking about generational things, right? Then they start making generational food that was made from the scraps that they used to eat, but was passed down from generation to generation. So now the environment now reinforces that biological factor. So now you have a biological factor and environmental factor. And then the other piece would be the social part of it, right? So if you're sitting around eating and you're eating those same things and you're praising it, and it's that kind of modeling behavior of eating these bad and not good foods for you, and that's being modeled for you in your environment, now you're getting the trifecta. And then if you kind of have a spiritual factor within food, as well, or if you have a spiritual factor that's impacting that scenario, all of that could impact it, right? But I will say, in my opinion, It's less likely if only one of those four factors are impacted by you. So if you only had the biological predisposition to diabetes, if you're an African American male, but then your environment was more of a healthy environment, and then your social factor really focused on modeling strong and good behaviors, and then your spirituality reinforced all those by, eating healthy, being healthy for your family, and, all the things that the spirituality side could also do by relating it to a higher power, then all of a sudden, that biological factor may not impact you as much as it would if all those other factors would. So Don, to your point, I 100% agree that poor modeling behaviors inside of that biopsychosocial model, spiritual model, is most certainly critical. And every single time, if I'm guilty of this, right? Is fast food and things like that, right? Getting out there and not really eating healthy and doing that, that's modeling bad behavior, right? If you're going and stopping at Taco Bell 3 times a week instead of, throwing some chicken in and eating some vegetables at home, that's, probably just as fast to eat if you use an Instapot or something like that. So thanks for adding that part, Don. Let's see, anything else?
I'll go ahead and say, since no one has, trauma and ACEs kind of all envelop these as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
your social support, even if students haven't learned proper coping, regulation, communication skills.
Absolutely. Communication skills, in my opinion, is probably one of the um, biggest factors that I think could impact health outcomes, right? If we could teach kids just to communicate with their lived environment, right? I feel like that would almost be 50% of what they need to do. But whose responsibility is that in our communities? Is it their parents? Is it the school? Is it the church? Is it, what is it, right? Well, I think all the time, those are always the questions of how do we pull a community together to answer all of these social determinants of health. But I will add one other piece that you talked about, which was trauma. And absolutely. And I think trauma, in my opinion, is generational, right? I think there's data that supports it. I think it's a little bit quasi data at this point, but definitely generational trauma impacts you in some way, even if it is the modeling behavior of that trauma, right? If you have a Vietnam veteran dad or some of these new war Operation Iraqi Freedom or Enduring Freedom veterans, if they're drinking every single night and also blowing up, having nightmares, that could impact the kid who will then live in that trauma as well. So I think it's very important to remember that all of these things impact us on a daily basis. I'll also add that policy does not equate equity, right? It does not equate that things will do good, right? The Affordable Care Act, and again, I don't want to get too political, so I just kind of keep these in here to kind of show that typically whenever they pass different type of legislation, that legislation most of the time does not impact the direct practice level, right? So what it happens is they will pass some Affordable Care Act, but that didn't change the way that doctors provided medicine. All it did was increase those who were insured, but it did not increase access, right? It actually increased the demand, but not access. But more people are insured. And I know I used to show a slide here that showed United Healthcare after the Affordable Care Act, right? Their stock went through the frickin' roof. Well, really all insurance companies did, but United Healthcare really took the cake and took home a whole lot of money. This CARA legislation was really looking at alternatives to pain, right? So whenever the opioid epidemic and that type of stuff started happening, they came out with the CARA legislation. Well, they might have changed a little bit of way of how providers can prescribe in the future, but it gave maybe some alternative pain treatments to insurance companies, but it did not change the way that we actually practice at the individual level. It was just another layer to try to help overcome something in our healthcare system that's already broken. So all of these were just layers of different things that are being layered on top of layered on top of layered on top. And actually, we continue to have the same shit care that we've always had. And nothing tends to change. If anything, it gets worse because some of these policies impact more maybe of the appointment length. Like, I forget when it was. I want to say it was 2002 or somewhere around in there. Medicare came out and said primary care will only now have 20-minute appointments, right? That's all they will pay for. So then all of a sudden now you only have 20 minutes with your provider, and that 20 minutes is now dwindled down to maybe 8 minutes. I forget what the average is now, but you sitting down with your primary care doctor is roughly about 8 minutes. I know it wasn't quite 10 minutes, so it's somewhere right around in there. That the time that you spend with your provider is only going to be about 8 to 15 minutes. And then even in therapy, right? We have it written into, like, if you worked in your own private practice or places like that, right? You bill for 45 minutes and then you get 15 minutes to do your note, right? That's the way that they build in these different things. And then they start taking away all these other little pieces that they do, right, to save money. And even right now, insurance continues to get worse and worse. So, and I think we're kind of living in that right now because all of our insurance is changing. Hopefully none of that's impacting you all, but we change insurance because premiums go up, or, well, that's why we're changing it, I think. But then overall, we're also changing because, we spend more on co-pays. So then we're like, okay, well, let's just change our insurance altogether. And it's a pain in the butt, but it's what we have and it's the system that we work in. So not only does the US have the lowest life expectancy among high income countries, but it is also the highest rate of avoidable deaths. So anyway, let's see, any questions or anything before we kind of take a break? Oh man, I missed a few things in the chat. No, I didn't. Okay, I'm caught up. All right, well, let's go ahead.
Hold on real quick. When you say avoidable deaths, are you talking about like the uncared for diabetes and like those medical, or are you talking about our inhibition to explore not so safe activities?
I would say it's our health behaviors. It's our eating habits. It's our lack of exercise habits. It is like all of those things lead to keeping us from dying. So whenever I say avoidable deaths, like heart disease is an avoidable death, right? There's certain places that it's not. I don't want to say all heart is that way. I know some people have faulty things inside their heart. But overall, high blood pressure, avoidable, right? High cholesterol, avoidable. That would be an avoidable death. If you die of a heart attack, more than likely that would be an avoidable death. I'm trying to think of another avoidable death as far as that goes, but I would say whenever you say in healthcare, especially if there was an avoidable death, it's probably because it could have been avoided based on your health. Yeah, smoking, that's another big one. That is a huge one. I think it's getting 10 times better in the world, but it is still a major factor. And I'll say here in Colorado, we have another factor. I forget how many states are now, but we have marijuana smoke. And if you look at the research behind marijuana smoke has a lot of the same chemicals in the smoke itself that actually cigarettes do, right? So anybody who smokes marijuana and thinks that it's not going to impact them negatively because you're putting smoke into your lungs is absolutely wrong, right? Like if you look at the chemicals, they're exactly the same. And then people argue, well, there's not been a death associated with marijuana smoke since it's happened. And at the end of the day, the only reason that is the case is because the research wasn't able to happen. And most of the people who were smoking marijuana were smoking cigarettes, even in those cases. Every single one that you look at, to where it says that most of the people who were ruled out for those were smoking cigarettes, and or if they were participating in those studies, they were smoking cigarettes. So it's kind of like, those health habits. I'll also say drinking would be another one since we're talking about some of those, but just drugs in general. Caffeine. Caffeine, is a direct correlation between caffeine and high blood pressure. And high blood pressure is one of the most silent killers because that's what leads to strokes. That's what leads to those types of things. And then whenever you have a stroke, you're going to have a whole lot more health appointments after that, right? So then you're going to have many different things like that happening. Let's see. Anything else? Any other pieces? So that looks like I answered that for Karen. Anything else? All right. Then let's go ahead and take a 12-minute break. Let's be back at 5:45. And we'll turn it over to Jenny. It looks like Jenny's on, so we'll turn it over to old Jenny. Jennifer. All right, everybody. Hopefully, y'all are back. I forgot to mention that you may need your mat since Jenny's here. I know I kind of told y'all, or Jennifer's here. I know I kind of told y'all that at the beginning, but but I will go ahead without further ado, go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Hey there. And thank you, Charlie, for going back and forth between Jenny and Jennifer. Either one is fine. Also to you all as the class. I've known Charlie for quite a many years at this point now, but so when I was a little bit younger, I went by Jenny. I try to go by Jennifer now, but whatever y'all want to call me is fine. So today we will be doing a presentation, and we'll also do flow through yoga. I'm going to do it in a different way than I've ever done before, and a way I've never been taught in before. But I figured I would like to try that with you all if everyone's open to that. If not, hopefully you can sit back and laugh a little bit while we try it out together. That's okay too. But we will we're going to do a broken style of teaching. That way I can say, this is how you would do this on a mat. This is how you could do this with a chair. We can all come back to the computer or phone or whatever you're on your session through, and we can ask questions, talk about it a little bit. We have some just light poses and a light flow that you could definitely combine into your own, and I encourage you to do so. But I figured that that might be a good way to just make sure you have a good time for Q&A and you're not like, 11 o'clock at night, like, how do I do this or teach this to somebody or whatever it is. So I hope that's works for you all, and we'll see. And if it's not great, then at least we tried something new. But we will go ahead and get started with the presentation. On inclusivity. And then after the presentation, I'll give everybody a little bit of time to get props, and I'll tell you different things that you can use as props if you don't have the actual props, and show you things that I have collected from around my house too, and things that were taught to me in my yoga teacher training. So let me pull up the presentation and we will get going. That's not the one. Sorry, I've got so many different things open, making sure that I pull up the sorry, for some reason it's not popping back up, so I'm going to reopen the whole thing. And Charlie, while I'm doing this, there it is. Okay, I was like, I know I have it open. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
You should, but I was looking at that as you were talking just to make sure.
Oh, I don't. It's actually blocked on my side.
What about now? I think I just made
Yep.
you a presenter. Okay, perfect.
There you go. Popped up in real time. I'm going to check the chat before. Okay, there we go. And during the presentation, we'll have time to open dialogue and things like that too. Feel free to drop things in the chat, ask questions. Definitely encourage it. I think inclusivity is always and should forever be changing and growing. I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. And so we learn by communicating with each other. I do want to say, as we get going, just group agreements if everyone's okay with that. Make sure that we are respectful of each other, share what you feel and what you think. And if anything comes up for you, definitely feel free to communicate that verbally, in the chat, whatever that is for you. If you need to step away during any point of the conversation, or during the yoga flow. Definitely do whatever serves you. That's a big core foundation of yoga in general. Nothing's too heavy or anything from my perspective, but again, everyone's experience of things is different. So just want to make sure we're respecting each other and also respecting our own feelings in these spaces. So let's present review. Let's make sure this. How does the view look from your side, if you don't mind helping me with that, Charlie? Is it showing is it showing my notes in the presentation?
It's showing the presentation, and now it's showing audience window, enter full screen mode, because we still see like your web browser thing at the top, but we do see inclusivity right there.
Okay. Yeah, this is new for me in Canva. So you can see the search bar and everything up at the top.
We can see the search bar, but we also see the presentation too. If you hit the button at the bottom, like if you go all the way to the bottom, it disappeared. Now if you go all the way over to where those two arrows are pointing in the opposite direction, boom. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. But then if I go out of that, I can't see my notes, right? Can you all still see it? Can you see it in full screen now?
No, not in full screen. It's still, but I mean, this works. You could present just like that. I think we can still see it.
Okay. Okay. And thanks y'all for your patience while I learn using Canva to present. Okay. Move this. Okay. All right. So for the presentation today, we'll talk about inclusivity as a whole, but then also why it matters to yoga. There we go. Now it's letting me move that. Okay. All right. And for the topics that we'll discuss today within inclusivity.
There is a audience window little thing that we see. I don't know if everybody sees it, but I see it. It says audience window, enter full screen mode, and with a little X mark that you could close out of. You don't see that, do you?
Mm-mm. Yes. Oh.
There it is. Now it's gone.
Okay. I don't know why. So when I do that, then it takes when I do that for you all, it takes away all my notes and everything from that. I have a solution if I can go. Let me just pause for 1 minute. Is that okay? Okay, just 1 second.
Does anybody have any questions about the course while we're waiting for that? Anything to do with our practicum? So the practicum, for anybody not doing it beforehand, will be May 27th at Fox Meadow. Whenever you come, make sure you have your mats, anything that you need. I mean, I plan on bringing my whole bundle of stuff. So if everybody else could probably as well, make sure you have your whole bundle. The expectation isn't that you have to teach some 60-minute course. It starts at 8. I have it blocked from 8 to 4. I don't think we'll need all that time. I think we'll be done probably halfway through the day. So let's just say 8 to 1 to be safe. Just because maybe some people might have a longer sequence and things like that. But the goal is to really just be able to get up there, present your sequence, no stress, right? While you're presenting your sequence, the things to remember, of course, is, the Yoga Sutra, right? Are you implementing any Yoga Sutras? The grounding, and then also the flow between each sequence. So, if you're moving from sitting to standing, what is that transition? Are you just telling people to stand up? There should be a transition from that, like, from downward facing dog to standing, or however, or maybe standing downward facing dog to chaturanga all the way down. Yes, actually, you have your evaluation in the SharePoint. Whenever Jenny kind of gets back up and going, I'll get that link and I'll put it in this chat so everybody will see exactly where the guideline is. So if you want to do it beforehand, you can do it one of two ways. You can kind of get together with some friends that's on here or some colleagues and go ahead and present it. We have a group that is meeting on Monday, and I think there's about 4 people in that group. Don't quote me on that, but they're going to meet. I'm going to be there with them, and then we're gonna do their evaluations there. The other option, you don't have to be at that one. We'll arrange it around your all schedule. The other option would be to record a video. You could do it on Teams just like this, right? You could set up a meeting, record yourself teaching a class. You don't have to have an audience in front of you. However, I will be judging if you did not provide alternatives, right? Like Jenny's going to provide some, or Jennifer's going to provide some here in a little bit, of different types of alternatives with poses and things like that. If you're only teaching the sequence and you're not really thinking of inclusivity as you're teaching it, right? Of maybe somebody with an ailment, you're not really kind of diving through that. That would definitely be something to look for as well. So if you're doing a recording, it's going to be a little bit harder to do that if you don't have an audience. But, go through the motions of it if you're doing the recording, right? You don't have to be like, hey, Jennifer, you need to grab your strap to put it around your foot. You don't have to do that detail. You could literally just hold up the strap and say, and an alternative to this forward fold would be to put a block underneath your hands, or maybe to have the strap underneath your feet and pulling up or pulling you down, or to have the blocks there. So there's different ways to kind of be able to offer those pieces to kind of be inclusive as well. So that's the other piece. Hopefully that answered your question, Victoria. I felt like I went on a long answer, but you can either record it and send it to me directly, or you can kind of maybe get with a few people, get with me, and then I could come do the evaluation that way. All right. Looks like Jennifer's back up and going, so I'll turn it back over to her.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all for giving me a moment. I'm going to present from the screen that you all are on. So if I'm looking off to the side, that's because I have my own presentation pulled up on my other screen over here, but we will get going. Okay. So again, today we'll talk about inclusivity, what that means, and then yoga history, community connection, accessibility. We'll talk about how to be trauma informed also.
We don't see anything if you were sharing too. Sorry.
It's not? Oh, okay. Many technical issues tonight, which is, if you're going to teach yoga virtually, that's something to keep in mind too, because
that's absolutely
we run
right.
into these issues sometimes. Okay, I'm going to try to share it again. And we're good?
Yep, that worked.
Awesome. Teamwork. Thank you. Okay. So for the agenda tonight, again, we'll talk about inclusivity. We'll do a brief history of yoga, community and connection, talk about accessibility, different ways that yoga spaces maybe have not been accessible, or how we're looking to expand that, creativity and curiosity there for sure. Trauma-informed teaching, reflection of self, and then also final thoughts. Again, I encourage you all to step in chat, or I'll invite you to come off and talk if you would like. I think that these conversations are definitely helpful when we are able to openly conversate, but also no pressure if that's not for you. And I did want to start out with a question. So if you would like, you should just be able to click on the screen. If not, you can type it in chat. I know sometimes these polls and things don't always work. But yoga, this is true or false. So yoga is a universal practice. that naturally includes everyone. So there's no need to intentionally address diversity or inclusion in yoga spaces. And I'm not going to do a results screen share, but I did like the way that this was worded, and it's something that I think about often. Is sometimes we can go into spaces and it's like, well, I'm opening up this space and I'm offering this and I'm trying my best to make sure that I'm providing opportunities for everyone to feel comfortable. But, we have to take a moment to really reflect on what I think makes everyone feel comfortable versus what actually makes people feel comfortable is different. And being mindful of who we're teaching, like for example, in the previous week when I supported the class in a teaching, I asked Charlie like, oh, who are the different people that will be present, and experience level, different things like that. And so just thinking about this question and the twofold of it. It's easy to think that we're making a space and that people just being able to be present, but it does go deeper and there are different levels. Okay. So as we step into the conversation about inclusivity and diversity, I just wanted to provide some definitions to make sure we all have the similar understanding of what it means for today. So for diversity, that's the presence of differences that include race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status, language, disability, age, religion, commitment, or political perspective. As we go around in our world every day, I think we live in one of the most diverse countries as is, and especially as we continue to connect in spaces that are virtual. There's so many more people that we come in contact with, and our worldview continues to widen and open. And so thinking about how we can embrace diversity, respectfully engage with diversity, and being aware of things that we may not experience ourselves, but need to be aware of as teachers and also just humans going about our day-to-day life. And then equity, ensuring fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people while striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Equity as a whole, it doesn't mean everyone's getting the same thing as a Band-Aid kind of fix, and this is what everybody gets, and figure it out. I think about equity in a way of how do we make sure that everyone is getting the fair treatment and opportunity, but what does that really mean? Like if someone needs more here or support there, or what is limiting them from having access, and how do we break down those barriers? Some things are more, physical ways that we can see that, but sometimes it shows up underneath too. And how are we creating spaces that are equitable and accessible to many? I think as we get into the presentation later, and then also as we talk about the different poses as we flow through, that'll be really important to think about. I was reflecting as I was putting the presentation together about some of the ways that I've never personally experienced in a yoga space, but ways that you might work with somebody that has maybe amputee or something like that, or someone that has neurodivergence, where their way of communicating or speaking may be different. Someone who is deaf, or how do we provide different supports and environments to make sure everyone can engage in a way that suits their needs, which is always a place of learning. And I think it's important to practice humility and not think we're always going to get it right. And being okay in that space, which also goes along with yoga practice and philosophies as well. And then lastly, which is our main one for today, is inclusion. And I already spoke about this some, but creating environments that everyone can feel comfortable in. And that means the individual and the group
they can feel respected, supported, and valued, and how they show up, how they communicate. And I think that the way I think about inclusion as well is inviting people to not judge themselves. There's so much judgment in our days. And when we go into spaces, especially like yoga, I know that the very first class I ever went to, well, outside of some tapes and stuff that I would watch on DVD when I was way younger, trying to figure it out. But like, how do they do this and what do they do? But, thinking about how intimidating it can be to come into a space and doing yoga, and sometimes even how we'll still experience that as teachers. I know one of the spaces that I had really underprepared myself for, which was kind of funny when I think about it, is inclusive. And when I was working at, or when I did yoga at the Montessori school, working with kiddos that were like 3 to 6, 3 to 7. I was like, okay, I learned a lot my first time and I was able to improve on it, but I was like, I thought that I'd put in so much effort. And so sometimes it's not always like, oh, I left somebody out, or I did this wrong, or I did that wrong. Sometimes it's just like inclusivity is creativity in motion. How do we make sure that we are really thinking about how everyone receives things and how we learn as teachers? So I do want to pause here. Is there anything that anyone would like to add about how we define any of these areas? You can type that in chat. You can come off mute if you want. And then also, if nobody wants, I won't take too much time, but I just want to see if anybody else wants to add anything.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to this issue, I really don't ever want to assume anyone's abilities based on maybe their physical limitations or their age or anything like that. I don't want to address it if it's really not an issue with them, but I also want to recognize that it may be an issue. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is something that you will definitely come in contact with for sure. I think for me, how I would answer that is you have a responsibility as the teacher, which is, a reason why we have to have insurance, or if we're working through someone, like we have to be able to support and protect those that we are teaching. That's a liability for us. And I think it's important to look and watch how different particular people are moving, especially if someone like, your intuition or something in you is cued, like this person might hurt themselves, or, I've tried to push myself too far in practices, especially when I was younger, and it was more about how does this supposed to look versus the actual spiritual and body practice of it. But yeah, I would say as you're as leading the class and being a teacher, part of a student working with you, or someone embracing your teaching, is that's a bi-directional relationship. Like you're going to invite them into your space as well as they're inviting you into theirs. Now, I would definitely say, which we'll talk about later too, is I would never physically touch anybody. I'm sure you already know this, but always asking permission. Like if someone was overextending or hyperextension, that's something that I was corrected on in my practice when I was younger. I didn't realize I'm double jointed and I would hyperextend and not realize it. And it was actually harming me. But I had no idea for who knows how long I was doing that to myself and not realizing it. And the instructor came up to me and he was like, hey, can I show you something with my own body of like how this looks, and then how it's supposed to look. And so instead of getting asking if he could physically alter me or shift my arm or anything like that, I really liked that way of having that boundary, but also still fulfilling his role as an instructor at that time. And then giving me the why, which invited me into being like, okay, how do I think about this deeper? As am I just trying to do this practice and force my body, or am I embracing how a flow is supposed to happen? And then just the root of it too, that liability aspect. You don't want someone to get hurt or harm themselves or anything like that under your teaching, because law and suing or different things like that may come into play. And I will pause here. And Charlie, I'm not sure if you're still present. I can't see if you're on, but did you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, one thing that I would add is, at the end of the day, whenever we talk about being inclusive and we talk about the language of not wanting to offend somebody versus, or even putting that out in the air sometimes, is one thing to always remember is these are just words, right? Like even at the very fundamental piece of this, it's funny, we were having a conversation in another class about using your pronouns, right? From a very fundamental place that is being very inclusive of allowing people who never were in that space or never had an ability in space to say, these are my pronouns. So you're giving them the space to do it. But of course, we obviously offend people whenever we use our pronouns for some reason. And, at the end of the day, those are just words. And people are getting so offended by the words themselves. And in reality, those words don't even mean anything to the people who are getting offended by them. And so basically what I'm saying is I don't think you should be afraid of offending people, because at the end of the day, we're trying to create the space to allow people to be included in that space that historically may not have ever been able to have that space or have the ability to have the space to say, I don't fit into a boy and a girl mindset, right? I fit into this, and now I have a space to where I can express that. And that's really what we're trying to look for as well whenever we talk about inclusivity. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but hopefully it did. Is don't be so worried about the words that may offend other people. Think about it more of how it is going to make it inclusive for that entire class or people in that class to be able to feel free.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And thanks for unpacking that part of it a little bit more too, because I definitely focus more on the physical aspect than the directional aspect. Do you have any examples of a time where you were teaching and maybe you were worried about somebody overdoing something or pushing themselves too far, or you maybe perceive or were perceiving that that they could be at risk of harming themselves in some way, shape, or form? And how did you redirect them or
So
address that?
yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I would say anytime you're in front of a class, there's almost three different approaches that you can use whenever you see somebody maybe not listening to you. And again, listening can also be that they're not really understanding because of cultural differences as well. So, just because they're not listening, they may not be me who's just doing their own thing, listening to their body and going through their own poses. So you kind of want to balance that to where you can kind of go in there. And the way that I tend to do it is whenever I'm in front of the class is the very first thing that I do is I repeat the directions, right? And if I see that the person is not moving into the direction that I need them to, then I may go over and start walking around your yoga class for a minute, right? Just like a regular classroom. I'll get closer to them and I'll repeat the instructions again. I won't look at them directly. I won't like get down if they're in downward dog and I'm trying to get them in there. I'll look them right in their eyes and be like, it's you, right? I won't do that yet, right? But then the next phase that I would do is if I see them continuing to do it, and downward facing dog may be a good analogy, is if you see their shoulders kind of rolling inward, right, and you want them to be rolling outward, then maybe what I would do is maybe not touch them, but I might lean down beside them and say, hey, it looks like your shoulders are rotating inward instead of outward. Is there a way that you can kind of maybe roll those out this way and maybe show a little bit more of an individual attention at that point? And that tends to be how I do that. Now, I'll say another thing that you all mentioned is also the competition that we have a lot of times with each other. And what I mean by that is I'm a very competitive person. I think I've mentioned Stephen being somebody that me and him kind of did a lot of yoga together. Every single time we were in chaturanga, right? And if we were in like a push-up pose, by God, I'm not coming out of that push-up pose until Stephen does. You know what I mean? I'm not coming out of downward facing dog unless Stephen does, right? And he's got to do it first. Um, every time I see that, I just remind people that sometimes whenever we are not in the space of our individual growth, we can cause harm to not just us, but other people. Because if I'm not trying to not compete in that moment, then Stephen would not be trying to compete in that moment. And whoever's stronger and whoever's whatever may lead to an injury because the other person's trying to last longer than the other person in whatever pose, or, try to do something, heroic or whatever you want to call it, right? The macho-ness of it. Um, I would say most of the time whenever I teach, especially in a class with highly competitive people, I probably mention that probably 5 to 10 times in a 60-minute class, is to not think that you have to overindulge in competition, right? And that's actually a yoga sutra, is not to overindulge. So that's even bringing a yoga sutra into your practice whenever you start to kind of hone in on some of those things. And then that's also how I try to relate it to, especially if they're there for the yoga. If they're there for the yoga, then they'll relate to the Yoga Sutra. And then I can kind of say, even in ancient practice, yoga was never meant to be a competition. You don't see competition like CrossFit games on ESPN. You don't see yoga games on ESPN, right? Because there's no competition in yoga. And those are the kind of the things that I do to try to alleviate some of that. Did that answer the question?
For me, it did, but the original question, I'll leave that up to her to express.
Yeah, someone put in the chat a really good answer as well, but like my mother-in-law's 92 years old and she goes to the Y, and she always comes and complains like they think I can't do anything. And I don't want to be that person, but that makes someone feel like they can't do it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
so that's what I had in mind when I was thinking of the question. But I also like what Charlie said, how to kind of address it, but not really directing it at the person. And then if you notice they're still doing it wrong, then maybe say something to them privately. That's what I got out of your answers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and my brain immediately went to there's a step class I go to on Saturday mornings, and most of the time that is elderly women that are in there, and they run circles around me. I don't have any idea what I'm doing in there. And the teacher will often say, I know we have people that are newer here with us today, so I'm going to tell the more advanced people, like, here's the secret, here's something for you all, and then while their more advanced students are doing that, which you would say differently for yoga, you would say, here's sorry, I lost my words. Here's a pose, and now I'm going to provide modifications for those that are still working up to that maximum level of the pose, because there's always modifications throughout. But yeah, so it is. It's also something I think as you're teaching in real time, you'll learn to read that energy of the room and know if you need to provide a lot more modifiers for different people or slow your pace down in the moment too. But yeah, and thank
I'll
you for
also
asking. Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to add, I also add at almost the beginning of every single class that that everybody there is a unique individual, and that they should listen to their bodies. And if their bodies is not telling them to do something, they should most certainly not do that. And that their body may tell them that they aren't going to do that today, but that doesn't mean they're not going to do it, right? And I try to give everybody that caveat to also say that I have no idea what people are going through in this class. I have no idea what their bodies are going through. So please listen to your body. It is not my place to tell you what to do with your body. So kind of give them that permission as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this the next question, or the next slide, was actually oh, let's see, is it gonna let me go? was actually a question to the group about how inclusivity could show up when you're teaching. So we can pause here for a moment if others wanted to share. I know we did take some time already on this, but as you think, or if you want to come off mute or chat, thinking about body differences, thinking about stretching and awareness of their practice. Are they newer? What do you know about them? Do you know anything? And will you be able to know anything ahead of time? Also, I think comfort level is a big area to think about. Some people might completely freeze if you were to come up to them in their mat or try to. Some people want you to come and talk to them, and they love that that one-on-one attention, and really just leading with your intuition in that space, and then thinking about the language that you're speaking in. Is it inviting them to be curious of their own body, or are you telling them, don't do this, and that's going that's going to harm you if you do it. That's not the way that the teacher explained it to me when they were pointing out, but that's what they were telling me, is you're going to harm yourself if you keep doing this way. Because we want to build that self-trust, which is what Charlie was also just speaking about too. It's we will never be able to feel or know exactly what our students are thinking, feeling, receiving from the practice, because it's about their relationship with their self, even in their space as a recipient in that moment, and vice versa. So always cueing that, like, listen to your body, and hear what it needs from you today, and how it needs you to show up with it, and show yourself grace and gentleness. I say that a good bit when I'm doing a flow, and also in my own head to myself, because there's times when you're able to do more yoga and times where your practice is more consistent, and that changes with life and all of that. So pointing out all those differences. Did anyone else want to talk about how you think that you could practice intentional awareness as you are developing out your flows in your classes? I know Charlie was mentioning earlier that you all are going to be doing that soon. Have you thought about how you might cue that? Okay. And again, I know we already talked a little bit about this. And if there's anything in the chat, I can't see the chat while I'm in presenter mode, but I will circle back at the end.
There is, and I can keep up with the chat for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And so wanted to give a history of yoga. It's definitely something that I encourage you to spend some time with. I'm sure you've already received some of that in your training as is, but knowing where it comes from, how it's changed over time, and also it's definitely grown, and as it's modernized, it's the goal of this training is for it to be more inclusive, and so we're trying to integrate into new spaces where people may have not ever heard of yoga or seen yoga or been able to before. It is there, there is privilege around it, and there's also the history and the culture of it. And so here's a couple of infographics. I'm not going to take the time to dig into all of it, but just thinking about the roots of where it comes from, and how it's changed over time to be where it is today. There's a lot of resources online. I'll share this presentation, and I have these spaces linked into my notes section as well. And so I encourage you to look into that and think about how you might want to talk about that during your practice as well. Something that I'm really intentional about is that, they're like Sanskrit and the original language, and how this is such a spiritual practice. Sometimes when I'm talking to people about yoga, it is very athletic for them. And this happened actually just 2 days ago. Someone was like, well, what do you mean the spiritual aspect of yoga? Because they were just like, oh, I did a yoga class today. And they know that's something that I really enjoy and have a passion about continuing on as a yoga therapist eventually one day. And when I brought up like the spiritual and self aspect of it, because they were like, "Oh, my hip, I feel a lot of this tension there," and I was like, "Oh, you should really look up like what that means for emotions, or what might be held there in your body." And it just their way of practicing yoga is very different, and there's nothing wrong with it. I don't judge it at all, but it was definitely a different language that we were using and a different reason for the practice. And that's okay too. I think that it is very beneficial for everybody to join in this space. And as long as, we're remembering that history and the roots of it, even if you're not always speaking about it in your own practice, but you're to others, but if you, in your development of yourself as a yogi, keeping that in mind. And again, don't want to dig into all of it here, but we will move on to the next slide and talk about active inclusivity. And so thinking about our language, and I talked about this this earlier, but speaking in the original language of the in text, thinking about what the pose originally is called versus what we might call it now. That's going to be very different. Sometimes I'm not always completely comfortable talking about or completely comfortable saying the original pose myself, because I don't think that I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I sometimes feel like it's more offensive to mispronounce it than to not say it at all, because at least we're saying the same language. That's my own style, though. I think it's different for everybody. So we have, for example, Shavasana, and so that can also be called corpse pose, and whatever you're comfortable with. And as you find the time to practice, like saying things out loud is really helpful for me too, being able to get comfortable with saying it, or listening to YouTube videos of people that are leading practices and using the original language. But doing things with your own comfort level and thinking about your audience is very important too. What will they connect with? For example, like with the yoga training that I was a part of, part of that is working with veterans and people that have PTSD or trauma or foster youth. And if I'm up there talking in this language that is just not relatable to them, and I'm also trying to get them to do things with their bodies and talk about energies and spirituality and all this at once, that can be really overwhelming for someone, and maybe make them not want to be a part of the practice or not be able to absorb it in the moment. So finding that language that you resonate with the most, I think, is an act of active inclusivity. And then also thinking about who you're teaching that day and who you're supporting and working with. And again, after this, we're going to talk about modifications in real time. And so I'll be able to show you some of those, but thinking about how you can modify within your class. Like today I have a chair, a blanket, I have my mat. You don't have to have a mat if you don't have it. Some people may not have that. Sometimes gyms will offer that, but sometimes people will use just a blanket, or they won't use anything. And then there's blocks, but thinking about like if you have a thick book or different things that you might use, but just thinking about how you can modify poses and what you would need to do so, and where you're teaching and where people might be. And thinking about all the things. There's so much to think about. But as you get more comfortable in your own practice, something that was helpful for me during my training was like, okay, going into, like, for example, frog pose or modified frog pose. I have tight hips, and also one of my knees, like I can feel the tension in it a lot when I go into certain poses that require me to open up my hips, or different things like that. And so I would be like, okay, I feel tension here. Where would I put a block? I had no idea at the time, and I hadn't really been in a lot of classes where people used or prompted me through using a block or a strap or different things. And sometimes even just something for me, taking a blanket and putting that under my waist or my hip area. Like if you know that you have like a pelvic tilt, if you know you're aware of what that is, but it's not uncommon for people who have had kiddos to have a tilt, a pelvic tilt that you have to work through and learn how to undo. And I'll talk about all this more in depth and show physically different things later on, but just offering different ways that you can modify. It's the tools you use, but also modifying the actual pose to lessen it or strengthen the intensity of it for whoever you are with that day. Sorry, I'm having to move the presentation thing from my screen. Okay, and then thinking about the principles, like even just coming into this presentation today, thinking about group agreements, norms, things that I want to bring into the energy, and also taking my time talking about things. That's also something I try to practice when teaching yoga is taking things slow, talking about how people can show up for themselves, be whoever they are, not judge themselves, practicing that with my own self. Like sometimes I might say, you know, for me, this part is really hard even still, or like even in downward dog, I still can't get my heel all the way down without it being a little bit painful. And it's different for everybody. And so I think an act of being honest with your students as well and being honest in spaces with each other is also really helpful, and invites your it invites inclusivity in itself. So with these three different areas, are there ways that or principles, modifications, or any language that you feel drawn to, that you feel like you want to make sure that you resonate in your teaching with students? And also, you know, caveat here is I do prefer to take a bit of a slower pace, and I'm definitely more drawn to the energy and slowness and taking my time to feel that. I'm not always like that in my day to day. So when I'm in the yoga space, I feel like I'm allowed to more. But again, that is not for everybody. Was for some people, going at that pace might feel like you're stuck behind a or you're stuck behind a turtle at times. And so I'll pause here, but I would love to hear what things that you all feel like you would like to hold as a principle in your space, or ways you have turning in your head of how you might modify or how you might speak different things to your students.
I think being mindful of their age and learning how to communicate in ways they understand while teaching them some of the verbiage is always helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that reminds me of some of when I was connecting with the kiddos in the Montessori setting, I would have a creative time where I would be like, okay, you all make up a pose, like come up with an animal and what you think that might look like. But I also had a mat with me. That is something I used with my own son. Of it would have the pictures with different animals of like what the pose would look like with the animal. And I think that, you know, that's the way I was modifying it to connect with the kiddos, and also giving them something that's a principle I stand by with kids is I really encourage autonomy with children. Big believer in them having their own voice, being able to use that. And so, you know, even though it might not be a pose I know, if to them it looks like this animal and they've made it up, like I love that and I want to embrace that and encourage them to think in that way. Okay.
little nervous about holding a straight face when one of my kids names it the big back pose. So I'll work on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, we had one where the kiddo did they were making a lion pose, and the fun thing about this one too, which I thought was funny, but I don't know if the other teachers really enjoyed it, but I would get the kids to teach the other kids theirs too and give them a moment to shine and be a teacher. And not in quotation marks this time, they were teaching, but one of them took their leg behind them and they were like, all right, now you have to shake your leg from left to right while you're balancing on your hands and your foot. And that was his way of making a tail. And it was really funny. And it was also like, oh my gosh, that is also really incorrect for how to use your body or what's safe for your body. So, setting up that moment, I was like, okay, I need to rethink this. But we're always learning. Oh, it took me back. Okay. All right. And so the next, we'll talk about socioeconomic status and access to healing spaces. In this setting, we're able to be virtual. I don't know about for you all, but that's really helpful to me to be able to connect in that way. And thinking about how sometimes location and where you are at, sometimes people may not be able to get to a class. They may not be able to be anywhere near where a studio is. And then thinking about the childcare or do they have the appropriate attire that they think, or, because some of it is the reality of uh, disparities, but some of it is also internalized, like what we think we have to be or do to show up in spaces. So thinking about that, and also the time commitment that people will have to put into going in person. And then some of the other sides of that is being able to commit to a membership. I know that near where I'm at, one of the first studios that I had gone to, I'd signed up when it was like a discounted rate. And then when I found out what the monthly full rate, I was like, oh my gosh, how do people afford that? It was like, over 200 something a month, which is pretty normal where I'm at here in Nashville. But in my head, I'm like, okay, well, what are we thinking about with that? What are the clientele that would be able to afford that? And is that really inclusive? And something that I have as a value is I don't think healing should only be if you have money or access to different spaces. But how do we combat that? How do we create or offer things for everybody or show up in spaces where it can be accessible? Like, for example, in the school settings, or volunteering those classes once you have the certification, and creating spaces of openness. And I think another area that I'd like to bring up here is, something I think about as being um, a 31-year-old white woman who lives in Tennessee, and I had access to a computer and able to have Wi-Fi in my home where I could do the yoga teacher training and have people that supported me to be able to do that at a no cost to me was that was a really big deal, and that's something that I don't take for granted. And so how do we think about how we can share and expand those spaces, but also knowing what others may not have opportunities to receive. And so in that way, and then on the other side of that, not everyone might want to receive training from me or feel like they can connect with me. And I have to be aware of that too, in the way that I'm speaking or showing up, or might feel intimidating or anything like that. And not everybody that is, a 31-year-old white woman may feel that way. I feel very confident in many other ways too. And I feel like a lot of people will connect with me as well. But not everyone is going to completely mesh with everybody, and being aware of what we might symbolize to somebody may have internalized or ways that makes them feel inferior, insecure, and vice versa. I have those experiences too where I feel intimidated. So I would like to pause here, and I would love to hear other ways that you all feel like socioeconomic status and access has affected, or how you think that those who you might be supporting, it could affect them, and how you would be mindful of that in your practice, or show gratitude to however you've been able to come to this space. Have any of you all taken classes out in the community where you've had to pay for those classes, or not, or chosen not to go to a class because you were like, oh, I'm not going to, I don't have the ability to pay for that right now, or to give that time it takes to get there, or it's, 30 minutes across town, and I can't make that happen during the week or the weekend. What are some ways that that shows up for you, or that you feel like might show up for those that you plan to teach?
I live in a very rural area.
Mhm.
I'm an hour away from the school district that I work for,
Mm.
and there's nothing out here. There's no gyms. There's no YMCA. So I'm kind of trying to think of ways that I could bring this to my community in a way that would help them, because I'm sure a lot of people can't afford the drive to the city every day to do this.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Especially, that hour commute as is, and um, that sounds like a good opportunity for you to be able to bring that there as well. A lot of people would probably benefit from that.
I do think that the cost can be very prohibitive for many people. There is a studio in Pueblo, Colorado, which is about 45 minutes away from us, that it's called Studio Share, and it's donation based. So people just make a donation to pay whatever they feel that they can contribute, and the instructors volunteer their time. So all of the contributions just go to paying to keep the lights on, essentially. And it's always a very busy, thriving studio. And it's out of all the studios I've ever been in, it's very diverse, which is great to see.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that too. And what a way to resource and connect with others, and also make it accessible in that way. I'm gonna look I wrote it down so I can look up how that all works too. Thank you. And I see a hand up as well.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what Nicole said. There is a place that I tried over on Barnes and like west of Academy that's very similar. It's donation based. Right here in town, it's called Cambio Yoga. I don't know
Yeah.
if anyone's ever heard of that. I haven't been in a couple years, but I really liked it. And a little thing that they had that I liked was a yoga mat, like cleaner that you could wash your yoga mat there too, which I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But they also do some kind of training to be a yoga teacher. I haven't looked into that at all, but I think maybe they might provide opportunities for people who are learning to be yoga teachers to actually do it there. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they can do donation based, because there are some experienced teachers, but I also think there are some that are not.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's also sounds like good resources around it, with the mat cleaner. I've never heard of that, outside of sprays and things, of course, or those being shared, and people utilize them. But yeah, also thinking about the different levels of teachers and wanting and needing experience, because that's really helpful as you learn, and find your niche in the yoga space, and also keeping your practice up. And because that was my first thought, is hearing about these share spaces shared spaces are accountability to practice and finding community in that, because community is so important and hand in hand with accountability. I also will share my background is social work and more along the lines of counseling and things like that before, and also it currently. And so I think about again how I've seen that play out in that space, because it is healing, and it's I think yoga in particular is so powerful because um, I'm a big fan of therapy as a whole too, but also I think yoga is a way for people to speak in a way that's not verbal all the time, and it's self-sufficiency, self-attunement, self-connection, which then can model and show up in how they bring certain relationships to their life that also honor who they are, and it just creates healthiness overall, from my perspective. So healing and being able to break down generational traumas or find new ways of communication and slowness and breaking those cycles in spaces. I also have a friend of mine who teaches in New York, and he also had foster care experience. And this is public knowledge, or I wouldn't share about it, but he brings it into schools as well, and meditation for, in particular, the inner city of New York kiddos that are exposed to so much violence and crime at such an early age, and he's creating spaces where they have stillness and softness and meditation and getting in tune with their body. And I just think that stuff like that's so powerful, and being able to bring that to children, which I'm sure that you all are passionate about that in your own regard too, given background and purpose here. But yeah. And then again, I do want to point out virtual does have uh, its strengths, but as you all saw me trying to get connected and figure out the platform and all of that, thankfully I have another work laptop where I could pull it up. But thinking about the audio of and Wi-Fi connection and all of that, and if I'm over here speaking on my Mac, can the person hear me? And there's just so much that goes into it. Like, is my camera okay? And this and that. So just a lot to think about, whether you're in person or virtual. And yeah. Did anybody else want to add anything here? And also, again, I'm big on gratitude and, sharing those things about my personal way of coming into this. Very much appreciate that, how I was brought into the space, and a part of me receiving that scholarship is that I would share it with others, and I would bring other foster youth into that space. And I'm very excited to be able to do that and have shared it with young adults that I was coaching and supporting, and that was really beautiful and helpful to them in their professional, high intense jobs that we were working. If anyone wanted to share a moment of gratitude, that's why I was sharing that. But if not, we'll go ahead and move along to the next one.
I'll just add to also think about how many people would be in a yoga teacher training if it wasn't offered through the school, right? So we're already trying to break down the barriers that we possibly can. And the goal is always to pay it forward, right? I know I've mentioned in here multiple times is our goal is to eventually spread this yoga teacher training to our students, our families, and the community. And then the goal is to increase access, right? To continue to do those things. So just from a basic fundamental piece, you all are already being in an inclusive yoga experience as it is right now, and in the hopes to continue to push that forward. So I just wanted to add that piece in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that too. And I think it goes along the lines with some of the commitments of yoga as a whole are, practicing selfless work and being able to give to others, and that being an energetic benefit to all. So, all right. And then next, talking about disparities and representation. I talked about it a little bit, but thinking about instructors and leadership, I know a lot of the people that I have worked under, and again, it's not always about race. It's just the example that I chose for today. But predominantly white teaching and studio owners. Sometimes I know here in Nashville, I've heard people say, like, I feel like I can't even go into that studio because everyone is dressed a certain way or looks a certain way or has a certain income level or things like that. And that's not something that I want to be a part of, or studios that I've been a part. But at the same time, we don't want to think of it as any less. It's just like, does it resonate with my practice? That works for them. I, appreciate a space where it's more inclusive and people are able to show up as who they are, and that they see others that are different around them. And then thinking about how do we keep away from tokenism and not supporting others that may be of a different race or background, or I think I didn't get to hear all of Charlie's presentation earlier, but thinking about like health disparities and how with COVID a lot more Black or African American men had passed away from COVID, thinking about how that shows up and how we acknowledge that in how we make and build inclusive spaces, or if we were making sure to provide classes or teachings for the community, how we make sure that everyone feels invited to that. And it's not like, well, this is the face of me, so only people like me would want to show up, and that comes down to how we speak about things or what we label things, listing out like, this is welcome to all skill levels. This is welcome to everyone, and learning as we go, and partnering with others and asking questions with those that you have those relationships with. And, because I know for me, even outside of like taking race out of the equation, some people just don't want to do yoga. Like, that's not something that they feel like they resonate with for how it's marketed or talked about in the media or different things like that. Like my girlfriend that I go to step class with on Saturday, she loves working out, she loves movement, she loves all that stuff, but she was like, I would go to your yoga class, Jennifer, but I would probably never go to yoga outside of that. And that's okay. I wouldn't go to a step class for anybody else, but it's just thinking about how people break that down. Because on the other side of that, sometimes she'll talk about like how she struggles with anxiety, or like her mind moves so fast all the time. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, some yoga might help you, but I'm not going to say it to her in that way, but, trying to invite her into a space which she's now open to, which wouldn't have always been. And then, again, I've used myself as an example here. I'm, a younger white woman, pretty thin and eat pretty healthy. And sometimes that can look like I am super healthy, or I have all this going for me in different ways. But, there are underlying things that people may not see or may not understand, and not judging based on appearance at all, but also being aware of how you might be received in spaces or who might not resonate with you. And I think diverse staff, diverse community and connections. There's so many groups that you can be a part of, and people that you can learn from, people that you can take classes from. It's all just very helpful. But, thinking about how you show up in the world too, not in a negative way, but just something to be aware of as you grow in your practice. Yoga is for everybody that wants to be a part of it, of course. We should never force it on anybody, but yeah. All right. And then lastly, we'll talk about, well, this is the very last slide. We have one more after this, but personal bias. One second, this text box, I have to do it again. Okay, so thinking about how personal bias shows up, like, am I showing anyone favor in the class? I think that's something to be aware of. I have been in classes before where I can tell the teacher knew everyone in that class. Maybe that was like a one that they all seem to commonly go to, and they flowed the class in a way where it was like, I felt like you would have had to have gone to this instructor a few times before I would have really known and caught up to how they were. But they were comfortable in that space, and that was a group that was usually there, and I was new. And I just went on my own regard. I didn't know anybody or wasn't invited to it. And so, thinking about that, especially if you have something that you're going to do habitually or on routine, who are you showing favor for? Be just something to be aware of. I'm sure there are many other examples. That's just what I'm going to use. And then thinking about the language and how we cue, not saying like commanding language, or things that might make someone feel like they're doing it incorrectly, or saying, for example, like, oh, you'll get there one day, because then that makes the person feel like they're not there today. And yes, there is a level that is maybe more intense that they may be reaching for one day, but how they're showing up today is what matters, because the moment is what matters, and giving that to their body in that moment. And I'm sure I've said things that didn't resonate with people, and it's all a practice of, again, humility and learning as we go. Even the word, relax can be triggering for some people. Like if relax to me is not something that I can really resonate with, telling that person to relax. I don't know. Or another example that I wrote down that I wanted to say is, I've definitely heard instructors say, okay, now we'll move to the full expression of this pose. And I'm like, I don't know what that meant, especially earlier on, and even still now with some way more advanced instructors. Again, I tend to lean more towards like slow flow and yin. And so when I'm in like hot yoga classes or yang classes, I'm like, I don't know what we're doing here. And or I might go at a slower pace than others. So, being mindful of the language that we're using and how that is leading to inclusivity or exclusivity. And we don't ever want anyone to have a negative experience, which I think is just to throw in here, that if you're ever in a space and you think it's helpful and you have the time afterwards to offer, hey, if anybody wants to chat with me after class, I'm always open to hear thoughts or have connection moment, and giving that opportunity out to your students is helpful as well. And then thinking about access to props. Does the person have a bolster? Does the person have a strap? Does the person have blocks, or even, awareness of what those tools are at the moment? And then again, we've talked about this several times throughout today, but the power of choice, giving different offerings, like as we, go into our flow in a moment and talked about some of the poses, I might say, as you go into the warrior pose, which looks similar to a lunge at first, you can put the block over here on your right side or your left side, and push your body up on it. And if it feels good for you, and it feels good for your body, you can extend your arm up or position your neck in different ways. Like, sometimes I think something I can work on is maybe saying less words, and that I'm aware of that is being able to give different offerings, though, because you don't know, with all of those different ways you're saying this, what is resonating with who in the room. And I would rather give many different offerings than have somebody in the room that doesn't know what to do or feels like they're pushing their body too hard. So yeah. Okay. And then I was just going to close with with the different or the ethical call of yoga. And so thinking about earlier, we talked about selfless service. So being able to give to others and share our practice with others. And then non-harming, thinking about how that shows up in the language that we use and how we invite people to connect with their body, and also with our own in the moment and as we practice and model. And then we will end with a quote, and it says, "We will never have peace in the world until we have peace within ourselves." And yoga is one path to get us there, but we must walk it together. So I thought that that was something helpful for us to end on today. And I know we are at almost to the top of the hour. And so I want to give about 5 minutes for people to get props together or your mat or whatever it is. And I was going to go over that, but do we want to take like 5 minutes for anyone to get drink in between, and then we can talk about props because we'll all be moving while we go through this flow. Does that sound good, Charlie? Like 5 minutes?
That sounds perfect.
Okay. If anybody wants to grab a drink or whatever you need to do, and then again, we're not going to do a full flow, so whatever works for you. But we'll start back at 8:04. Sorry, 7:04. I believe is for your all's time. I'm on Central. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I will try not to keep you all till the full 30 minutes, but I do want to give some examples of how we go through the poses. And so I wanted to go ahead and invite you all to get blocks if you have them. So I'll go ahead and show you the blocks that I have. These also double as my son's diorama building pieces because he loves to take my yoga props and make them his own innovative way. And let me turn off my background so you can actually see. Okay, there we go. And so we have these blocks. And I also have these thinner blocks, if you see them side by side. These are a little bit thinner, and so you want to have a block where you can either have it like this, or you can stand it up like this. Both ways are going to be helpful to you. If you don't have blocks, something that I think is helpful is like if you have a book in your house, may not be able to be used like if you're using it long ways, but it can give you a little bit of height for the ways that you can use that. Or, you know, I think another thing that I grabbed, and again, this is, we're teaching inclusivity and being creative. Like another thing that I grabbed was a box. This was an old camera box that of my son's. It's something that can give you a little bit of height because when you're going to be using it, that's the purpose. It's not really about what it is. It's about not causing harm to your body. Okay, so going from the blocks, I was going to show you all a strap that I have. And so this is the strap that I use. I got this at, I want to say it was like Family Dollar or something like that. They had a whole bunch of yoga stuff in the spring and around New Year's when everyone's making those commitments to do certain things. And I was like, oh, I'm going to grab a couple of these. So if you have a strap, there are a lot of different materials. That's what I'm looking for. Different materials that they can be made from. Some people's they're like the climbing gear, like the really strong ones. And then this one's more of like a thin kind of silky feel. And something that I would use instead of that as well is like over here we have jump rope. It really, like, again, it has handles on the end, but it's really what you need is something that's going to help you get tension and that you can pull on either side. And even if it's something like you could use a belt, if you have a long belt, or something else that I was thinking of is I know out there in Colorado, you all definitely have these. So a scarf. I think that is something that's really helpful, and it's also just a nice texture. And so really what you want is just something that you can, again, get tension with so that you can take it up and over. And then I remember even in one of my yoga teacher trainings that I was in, someone took their, which I'm not going to bring that every year, but someone took their, or the teacher showed us like taking a broomstick because it also has, it's so stiff. Whereas like our straps or our scarf or this or that, there's a give on those objects, but the broomstick or the mop stick or whatever, there's no tension. What you have is what you get. There's no give is what I meant to say. And then moving on, so for a blanket, how I like to fold the blanket is like take it into threes. So I'll fold it in hot dog, and then take it and fold it into threes. I feel like for me, this just, it doesn't roll up or get bunched up as much and then roll it into three again. And this is helpful, like I was saying earlier, even with like a pelvic tilt, And so how I would use this is putting this under my tailbone. I do that even just sometimes when I'm playing board games on the floor or doing yoga or meditating or whatever that is. And what that does is kind of help my tailbone pop out more because I can lean in and hunch over and not realize it. And there's some just misalignment stuff that I'm forever working through, and you'll find yours as you go on if you haven't already. But a blanket's helpful for that. It's also, you can put that under your knees. You can unroll it some, put it under your knees. You can also offer to people to put it under their mat. It gives a little bit more protection if people want to layer things. Now that can be kind of tough if sometimes we'll see people put that on top of their mat, and that can make it challenging because if you're like slipping and sliding, there's give on blankets. But they do make blankets that are to go on top of your yoga mat. But just everyday blankets you're cozying up with around your house, if you're using those as props or if you're teaching people virtually and you want to offer that to them. As far as a bolster, I have a thicker pillow that I will double as my bolster when I am using that in yoga, because I do find that helpful, especially in some of the supported poses. So you would like, if possible, you would like to find one that has a little bit of pressure or denseness to it. A fluffier one is fine, or one that's not as thick. But if you can find one that does have a little bit more give, that's helpful. But if not, then you could just fold it over and make it thicker. You can also use couch throw pillows, whatever works for you in that. You could use the back cushion of this would make a really good thick bolster. It's it's a thicker cotton in there and not as much give to it as sometimes our bed pillows are. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about those or ideas that you have as you think about items around your house that could work or double as props for you? Any questions about that, or how you would use those, or that you wouldn't use those? Okay. All right. And so for the next section, we're going to, if you want to use your mat, you can. If you want to use a chair, you can. I'm going to talk about some of the poses. And again, I can't tell if anyone, if you all are on your mats or on a chair, and that's fine. Don't feel like you have to come off mute or come on camera at all. But if you do have questions, I definitely encourage that. I can see the chat now, but if you wanted to come off mute, you're welcome to as well. So we'll talk about some of the different modifiers, the chairs that I would like to use. You want to be mindful that the chair does not have wheels, or if the chair does have wheels, that the wheels are locked. But I just use my traditional dining room chair. You can also use a stool, but preferably something with a back if it's accessible to that person. Or, if a chair's not available, I'm thinking about like a couch that they might have, or just sticking to the traditional yoga mat or the carpet or the floor of wherever they are. You don't always have to have a mat. Of course, that is best practice if you do, but it's not required to do yoga. Okay. And then before I go into those poses, one other thing that I was going to show. Sorry, it blended in with the wall. Here's another prop that I use. I think working at the computer for so many years, something that I find helpful is to get a roller. And this is good for when you're trying to loosen up before the practice, and also to place like underneath your shoulders. And you can lay in some of the poses and just hold that. Again, I'm definitely more of like yin and sitting in those poses is what I like to do and prefer on my own. And this is one that I find helpful. You can also put it under your lower back and let it rest there. You can put it up under your thighs, under your knees if you have tension there. You can put it up under your heels to elevate, different ways, but blocks work just as well. So, okay, looking at the time, I do want to jump into this. Okay. So different ways that we could do a pose. So if you were in the class the other day, which I think everybody was, one of the poses that we did was mountain, which you can do with your arms above. You can do with your arms out like this. But if you were going to do seated, like say someone is not able to stand for whatever reason, or if they're choosing to be in a seated position, you just want to make sure that you think about the alignment of the feet. Do they need space? Should they put them together? And guide them through, our feet are planted firmly on the ground. Our hips are connected to the ground or our chair, remembering to say things like that. And then thinking about the shoulder position. So in mountain pose, we want our heart to be open and we want our shoulders to be rolled back. And then you can have your hands open down here beside of you, or you can rise up with them up above your head, and you can drop them back down. So it's still mountain pose, it's just modified in a chair. And then when you think about when we're doing our sun salutations, which we did last time, where we do our forward fold, our halfway lift, we went up into mountain, and then we also did ragdoll. Those were the poses that we had worked on. You definitely can still do those when you're in the seated chair. So this is a space where blocks can come into play. And let me point, I'm going to point this a little bit lower so you won't be able to see my face, but you'll be able to see the ground. And so when you take the blocks, you can sit them upright like this. And so just remembering that you're guiding people through how to position their bodies as well. So when we're sitting in, I could say forward fold and someone could fold right over, but that's not what we want. So as we're saying this, it's like, okay, now that we're going from mountain, I want to invite you all to move into a forward fold. So we want a forward fold. We want to hinge at our hips is a good way to direct that so that people aren't folding over into their shoulders. But you can also say that out loud and say, it's so easy for us to fall over into our shoulders. So let's remember to keep an active core and keep our shoulders propped back. We want to keep our chest open. And if you would like to use blocks, you can sit those up long ways, or you can lay them flat, whatever your body is allowing for your practice today. And so you take your hands flat on the top, which gives balance, folding at the hips. And then I would invite you to breathe in deep. And then you can also give cues of, in this position, you should feel this in your lower back, or you might feel this in your hip area. Again, if you feel a lot of pressure folding over into your shoulders, you may want to adjust that and see how you can roll your shoulders back some more and feel the engagement in your neck, or from your crown to your neck, all the way down your spine. And so that's how I would guide for forward fold in the chair. I want to give another example of a modification that's not in a chair. So I'm going to scoot this over to the side, and we're going to continue to use the blocks. And so we would be coming from, like if we're seated, if if we are seated on our mats and we were going into warrior, I think it's helpful to say for the next sequence, we're going to be using our blocks. If you want to place one on one side of your mat and one on the other, that way they're accessible, because with every pose, we're always going to do the opposite pose as well, or the opposite side as well. So I would invite everybody to come up into a, sorry, my mind is blanking right now. Tabletop. Come up into tabletop position. And then we would go up into a downward dog. And then we would swing that right foot up. And then here, even here, and I do this for myself. Some people, you can say, you can swing that foot up and let it land in between your your hands right here. Or you can say, you can take that right foot up, bring your knee down, and meet me in a lunge. And you can lower that left leg still. And this is where blocks can come in handy. So I would say I would invite you to place a block on either side of your foot, and you can come up into a lunge here. And so if you see how my back leg, I had it on my knee that whole time. And so that gives a lot of rest to my body while I'm using the blocks. And then I get to use these blocks to push myself up instead of trying to get all that momentum from my body. And then if you are doing this right now and you can feel that, I hope so. And then from here, you can say, so we have our blocks in, they're folded half right now. So if you want to make them taller, spin them around and then they would be long ways. And then from here, you can invite that person to come up with our arms above their head into warrior. Or, you can say if we will move into warrior with our arms above our head. But if this position feels comfortable for you in the lunge, I invite you to keep your hands on your blocks and allow that energy to move through your body. I think that that's a way where it invites the person, but it also gives them a minute to reflect on what their body needs in that moment. And if that feels good for them, which I know that felt good for me to do that right there. And then looking at time, I would love to spend some more time with you all eventually with more of the flow, but I want to give an example with the strap, because we did the chair, the blocks, and some poses. But with the strap, one that I really enjoy, which I'm going to turn my back to you all so that you can see. And so if we were sitting crisscross on our mat, one thing that we want to try to do is open up the back and the shoulders. And in our time today, I feel like shoulder tightness and the shoulder blades being activated, it's so easy for us to fall into poor posture. And so if you take the strap behind your back, what we want to go to eventually is being able to do this. So taking our right hand up over our head and being able to take our left hand from up to our lower back and then clasp them together. But that's kind of tough. And so you can take the strap, or in my case, I'm using my scarf right now. And I've got that right hand. I'll invite you to take your right hand with your strap behind your head, and then take your left hand and sweep it up your lower back. And then wherever it feels comfortable for you on your scarf, your strap, or whatever tool that you're using today, or prop that you're using, pull in opposite directions. And what you're inviting there is that they're taking space. I'm going to turn around so the audio is not working. Hopefully you could see that, but that you're not taking, or that you're giving space for the person to hopefully eventually get their flexibility where their hands can meet, but this gives them a tool to use until they get there. That's also one other thing that I'll say, and then I'll let everybody go, is we'll lay back on our backs for this one. Having tight legs, tight calves, tight thighs, this one's really helpful. So you can lay flat on your back and take your strap or your scarf and take your knee and pull it to your chest, and take your strap or your scarf or whatever around the bottom of your foot. And when you take the strap and you have your foot in the middle of it, you can pull your hands down the sides of the strap, and then you can let it fall to the left. And so you're getting a twist, and you want to try to keep your right shoulder down to the ground if you can. And so if you see that, that's giving you more control over how your body is going into that pose. You're not just flopping over, you're getting to slowly feel how your leg is being activated with this. So, and then you can use that to pull yourself back up as well. So that was a very quick overview of how to use some props and give modifications. I would love to spend some more time with you all when we have more time. And that's something that I've talked with